Boys, I'll tell you something right now. Life do surely comes at you fast. And things especially comes fast in the month of November when it comes to college football. You've seen all the news that has been dropping over the past couple of days, whether it comes down to all of the matchups that happen on the field or even stuff that's happening off of the field as well. We just got our first couple of firings, and we'll briefly talk about that here today. But we have a jam-packed Any Given Saturday podcast, and welcome back, speaking of which, to that Any Given Saturday college football podcast, because anything can happen on any given Saturday. Just ask those guys that have been favored by 20, 25, 30 points even, and yet find a way to lose the game. That's why you play the games on the field, kids. We got a fun Any Given Saturday podcast for you guys here tonight, as we are going to take a look at the updated Any Given Saturday power ratings as we get into these last couple of weeks of this college football season. Not only will we do that, we'll go ahead and recap a few games that maybe aren't necessarily the most the high profile games, I would say, to say the least. But for me, these were the three games that were the biggest surprise to me in all of college football. Some of which you guys might be surprised with, some of which you might not necessarily be surprised with, depending on how long you've been following along with the Any Given Saturday podcast. So that being said, we have a fun one for you guys today. I hope you guys stick around for the whole thing, because if you do, we got a little bit of an announcement towards the end. So I hope you stick around for that entire thing. So that being said, if you enjoy this podcast, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button, because hitting that like button, what that does for me is you're going ahead, not only you tell me you enjoy this content, and I really truly appreciate that from the bottom of my heart, but secondarily, what this also means for me as well is that you're also getting this video out to more college football fans like yourself. And you see the size of that channel. Side of our channel right now, we're not very big. We're actually a pretty new channel, just started this year. And with that being said, and that being considered as well, every like matters. Every click of that button matters. So we truly would appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. It only takes a couple of seconds. And in the meantime, very few subscribers on the channel right now, but I think we're better than that. I think we're a little bit on that underrated side. That being said, you have a real opportunity to be an A1 since day one, an OG, so to speak. And that also only takes a few seconds to do. And you could easily do that as well by going ahead and hitting that subscribe button as well. So that being said, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and kick things off here with the Any Given Saturday podcast. Hope the goal is to get at least 2 podcasts out this week, but we'll definitely get this one out at the very least. That being said, so let's just go ahead and dive right into it. We have a brand new set of Any Given Saturday top 25 power ratings. Now, I want to make this emphasis on the power ratings, and the main reason why I wanted to go ahead and do that, because I want to make this very notable distinction, okay? This is not how I would go about ranking these teams for, say, a college football playoff, for example. This is not how I would go about ranking these teams. All that this power rating model is, and what this represents, is if you have 2 teams on a neutral side field and you have them on that same field today, who would be favored over whom? This is what these power ratings are supposed to solve. This is what these power ratings give that type of insight into. So if you're not really into that type of thing, you might want to go ahead and move to later on in the podcast. I do have this pre-recorded. This is not like a live stream kind of thing, and you probably wouldn't be interested in that. So you probably want to go ahead and move over to when I talk about some game recaps, which, by the way, if you want me to give my opinion on how I should think like the college football playoff should be ranking these teams, go ahead and let me know down in the comment section. And, depending on what kind of feedback I get on that front, I will certainly go ahead and do that in a later podcast. But That being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. We're going to dive in like Trey Songz as we go. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up from there. 25 through 21. I'm going to show you what this top 25 is, starting from 25 to 21. This is what the 21 through 25 rankings look like in this new Any Given Saturday power rating model. Now, there is one notable distinction here in this top 25, and that is Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a team that did end up falling pretty significantly, actually. They did come in ranked number 19 in the country in terms of the Any Given Saturday power ratings, and things did change. Things can certainly change on a dime, and that was a perfect case. We had Ole Miss an opportunity to kind of spoil Georgia's chances to go ahead and go out and not only put Ole Miss, put themselves firm in that college football playoff conversation, but also to stop Georgia from clinching the SEC East. Here was happening in the SEC East going into this last weekend that we just had. Georgia was up by a couple of games on Tennessee. So on the surface, it seems like things were pretty locked down. However, a Tennessee win and a Georgia loss would have mean that the game this upcoming weekend, and a game that we will preview later on this week, what that means is that, okay, that is actually not the case. We actually have a game that does need to be played, right? So that being said, Ole Miss did have that opportunity, and for the first quarter and a half, it actually was a game that really was competitive. However, Ole Miss dropped the ball here. Ole Miss definitely dropped the ball pretty considerably. They got flabbergasted. They got bamboozled. They just had their pants down, especially in that second half. Georgia dominated this Ole Miss squad, and that's somewhat of a reflection. While Georgia is, certainly playing one of its best ball that we have seen Georgia play this year, coincidentally, on the other side, Ole Miss, maybe some hard questions that maybe need to be asked. They're not too far away from being maybe an elite program, so to speak, but you can't ignore the fact that Ole Miss got absolutely drubbed. So we penalized them heavily in the power rating model. And that's why we did end up moving them down 5 spots, down to number 5. And then you see the rest of the list. You got Clemson at 23, Louisville at 22, and Iowa at 21. Okay, cool. Now we jump into this top 20, and there's certainly a lot to unpack here in this top 20, so a little bit more time will be spent here in this portion of the Any Given Saturday power ratings. We'll start down at the bottom. We're going to start at Auburn at number 20. So Auburn is back in. They were unranked last week. However, Auburn been playing some pretty good ball, led by Hugh Freeze. Remember how controversial a hire that is? Well, year number 1 for Hugh Freeze has actually been a moderate success. This is going to be the first time that Auburn is going to be bowl eligible since 2019, and they do so in emphatic fashion, drubbing Arkansas. They beat Arkansas. They were an underdog against Arkansas, a minor underdog, like a 2.5-point underdog right before kickoff, but an underdog, so to speak. And not only do they find a way to pull off a minor upset in Fayetteville, Arkansas, but coincidentally, what Auburn was able to do was, well, they absolutely embarrassed the Arkansas Razorbacks. Sam Pittman and his guys are down horrendous, but even though Hugh Freeze maybe doesn't have his guys, so to speak, yet, majority are from the last regime, he's still found a way to win games. And with a game against New Mexico State coming up, they have an opportunity to win the most games that they've won since 2019 and have a very good season. Who knows? Maybe they can give Alabama a little bit of a run for their money. We're not sure yet. We haven't taken a look at Auburn's schedule yet, but we will possibly do that, as that might be a game that we preview later on. Again, you're going to have to stick around and wait. Tennessee, on the other hand, Tennessee was very disappointing. We had them borderline as a top 10 team. We no longer have that belief after what happened to Missouri. We thought that Tennessee was going to win an outright cover, but, well, actually, no. The model did believe this, but we actually believed that Missouri was going to find a way to pull this upset off, and they actually did. So, pat on the back for your boy for getting that right. You love to see it. But at the same time, though, Tennessee got their kicked, right? It was not looking good for Tennessee. Missouri essentially out Tennessee. That's really what happened in this particular game. And Tennessee had a chance to possibly come out and, put yourselves in a situation to where that Georgia game becomes an all the marbles type of deal where you're fighting for an SEC East championship, and they didn't know what was going to happen in that Georgia game. They actually played multiple hours before that Georgia game. So the Tennessee Volunteers, they had everything to play for. There was no reason to have the letdown. Yet here they are, barbecue on the titties. They do have a letdown here. So they fall significantly in our power rating model. We had them at number 11 last week. They're down here at number 19. Conversely, Missouri, this was also a moment where the model had to give Missouri its flowers. For the entirety of the season, Missouri was not ranked in this top 25. You have not seen them because the base rating for Missouri was not that great. It kind of underestimated Missouri over the course of this season. So while Missouri was actually involved in the college football playoff hunt until so much as a couple of weeks ago, the model was never really sold on the Missouri Tigers. That's changed here after that dominating performance for Tennessee. Finally, we get Missouri in here, ranked for the very first time here in the regular season. Only took 12 weeks to make it happen, but hey, better late than never. Missouri is here ranked number 17 in the country. And then Texas A&M. There's a lot happening with Texas A&M right now. I think we can all agree on that. Texas A&M, we have them up to number 16. Now, this was before the announcement that was made Sunday morning that Texas A&M did end up deciding to fire their head coach and Jimbo Fisher. And listen, I can applaud Texas A&M for making the decision quickly in that, okay, they realize that Jimbo Fisher is not going to be the guy for Texas A&M. I truly do, but I've always felt like the timing was a little bit weird because they did this after not just a win, but a dominating win. So what that tells me is that this was decided well before Texas A&M took the field on Saturday. But going to what Texas A&M was able to accomplish on the field in Jimbo Fisher's last game, Texas A&M looked really good. They dominated Mississippi State. I think they did that on the road too. So Texas A&M moves up 5 spots. They're up to number 16. Whoever gets that Texas A&M job next season is going to have a ton of resources to work with. Not only a fan base that has the money and the facilities, but they also have one of the best talent rosters in the country. If that next head coach can find a way to keep a lot of that talent on the roster, because now with Jimbo Fisher being fired, it now allows for any Texas A&M football player to enter the transfer portal. That is an exception made, and we saw this play out with the Northwestern situation at the beginning of the season. So definitely something to watch out for. I don't have a pinpoint on who should be the next coach of Texas A&M, but it's certainly that I want to explore either later this week or next week, depending on what kind of time constraints that we're working with. Now, we'll go ahead, jump into the top 15. This is what the top 15 is looking like. Washington and Utah actually do have the exact same power rating. It is literally the exact same following what happened, because we expected Utah to cover against Washington, and we were right. It ended up being that one possession game. Utah did lose. Washington found a way to gut one out in Seattle, but we actually thought that the model thought that this was only going to be a field goal game, not a touchdown game. So Washington got a little bit of a bump because of that, even though they didn't cover the spread, so to speak, officially, according to FanDuel. Again, these two teams have the exact same power rating, but since we just had a game on the field, Washington beat Utah. That's why Washington is ahead of Utah. Oregon State up 5 spots to number 12 in the country. Oh boy, did Oregon State. They looked really good in their game this past weekend. Oregon State took on Stanford, and Stanford has been a tricky team to some degree, but Oregon State was simply not faced. They blew out Stanford 62-17, and I feel like they're hosting Washington. It has major college football playoff implications, at least for Washington, and Pac-12 conference implications for both teams. And yet they decide to go to James Madison. ESPN decides to go to James Madison for the college game day. It just feels a real little sketchy considering ESPN, let's be honest, did have a role in terms of breaking up the Pac-12 conference. I feel like it should, even though James Madison definitely deserves the attention. They've done everything that they need to do to be ranked and be considered by the college football playoff. That's a story for another time. But Oregon State is playing some excellent football right now. And it's going to be a challenge on it. Oregon State is going to be quite the challenge for Washington this upcoming weekend. It's going to be an absolute problem. We'll see how Washington handles it because it could get a little hairy very quickly. Now, we'll go and jump into the top 10 now. One notable change here in the top 10. We have a high riser in the Georgia Bulldogs, which Georgia has looked pretty vulnerable in the early portions of the season, almost losing to Auburn, almost losing to South Carolina. Missouri gave them quite the fight as well, but you give a team like Georgia, who has won 2 national championships in a row, by the way, they still have the longest winning streak in the NCAA at the present moment. Programs and teams built like Georgia that have the caliber of talent that Georgia has with an elite coaching staff, they're able to avoid those early season lumps, avoid that big loss or those 2 big losses. They'll find a way to get better as the season progresses. And Georgia is a perfect example of that. They're playing their best football at the right time right now. We still can't avoid what they did in the early part of the season. That's the thing with these power ratings. It talks to the whole body of work, but Georgia is playing some excellent football right now. I don't see them losing in the regular season. That even includes that Tennessee game. Again, we'll preview that later this week, but we do have Georgia up 5 spots to number 7. And then we're going to wrap things up with the top 5. We got Alabama at number 5, for example. Don't they look scary right now? Ain't nobody trying to play Alabama. Kansas State, probably the best 3-loss team in the entire country. I don't think anyone really wants to play Kansas State. Ohio State handled their business against Michigan State. Oregon was fine against USC, but they didn't cover against USC. But Michigan, without their head coach and Jim Harbaugh, he was suspended before the NCAA even completes his investigation. Listen, is there a distinct possibility that Michigan did something wrong? Absolutely. I certainly don't dismiss that by any means. But I said this before, I'll say that again. I would have rather at least seen the investigation completely play out before any punishment was handed down. We don't get that, unfortunately, but Michigan is able to pull it out. They beat Penn State on the road, making Penn State have a little bit of a midline crisis with James Franklin. So Michigan is back to being the number 1 team in these Any Given Saturday power ratings. They'll have a battle in a couple of weeks against Ohio State, but they'll have to worry about Maryland as well. Maryland is not a bad team either, and they're certainly not a complete pushover as well. So that is going to complete the Any Given Saturday top 25. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Do I think I have some teams too high, too low? Let me know down in that comment section. I love a good discourse. And you know what we say about the model. We're always going to ride with it. Great week for the model, by the way. 45-19 in terms of betting on games straight up. 34-30 against the spread in week number 11. So it wins more than loses some, even though it might be a little bit crazy in terms of how you could have this team above that team when they play on the field. Like, I know it seems crazy, but hey, if it's not broken, why fix it? And, so far the model's been working pretty well, especially in this later portion of the season. But now let's go ahead, jump into some games here and what we got going on. Told you that we're going to have a few big surprises. And maybe we allude to some of those big surprises earlier. Some of those big surprises allowing a team to jump into the top 25 of our any given Saturday power ratings. Again, I want to really enforce the idea that these are power ratings. Again, not how I would rank the teams. But that being said, huge surprises around the country. But these three games I'm about to talk about, they certainly surprise me the most. And we are going to start down in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We alluded to it earlier. The Auburn Tigers, man, the Auburn Tigers with Hugh Freeze, they are starting to put a really quality season together. I'll tell you what. Now, Auburn, for all intents purposes, they're not going to compete for the SEC West. That was never an expectation for Auburn this season. But they've rolled up into Fayetteville, Arkansas, and not only did they find a way to win this game, that's not the hugest surprise for me, so to speak. What really raised an eyebrow for me was that the fact that this game was a complete blowout. This was over essentially at halftime. Like, it's complete domination from quarter one, opening whistle, to the final whistle that happened in the entire game. It was a complete dominating game for the Auburn Tigers. Auburn wins massively. They win 48-10. They killing the hopes and dreams of the Arkansas Razorbacks. And you got Arkansas fans thinking, is Sam Pittman still our guy? That's what kind of game this was. When those types of questions being brought up, that's never a good feeling. And a big reason why Auburn was able to win this game, Peyton Thorne, is he a mobile guy after all? This would be news to me. Because not only, Peyton Thorne, did a solid job of taking care of the ball, 12 for 20, 163, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He almost had 100 yards on the ground. That, I believe, is that a season high? We're going to do a discount double check to see if that is indeed a season high. So the only game where he had more yards, actually 2 other games. Well, we're not going to count the Stanford game. That's an FCS matchup. The only other game that Peyton Thorne had more rushing yards than he did in this Arkansas game when they hosted Georgia. And in that Georgia game, he had 92 yards. Peyton Thorne had nearly the same amount, 88 yards. Also had a touchdown on the ground. This is not a guy that really strikes me as that mobile dual threat quarterback. I see Peyton Thorne as more of that traditional pocket passer, but hey, to his credit, he's finding ways to at least keep the defense honest. I wouldn't call him a dual threat quarterback by any means, just because the box score may suggest that and he has his spurts, but Peyton Thorne finds a way to keep the defense honest, and that's really how a big way to go and set the tone. He had 250 yards of total offense, 4 total touchdowns as well. And this was a game that Auburn, like I said, they dominated from the get-go. Auburn was able to open this game up with a 75-yard opening drive, which was capped off by Peyton Thorne. Not to mention Arkansas forcing a punt on their first drive as well. And then Keontae Scott. It's always a good day when the special teams are getting involved as well. Keontae Scott takes that, crimps it for 74 yards, and it just feels like the energy in the stadium. By the way, according to ESPN.com, that was a sellout game too. That's how you know that the energy in the stadium is not going to be good vibes at all. I'm going to say it like that, right? Because when you already have a 14-0 lead after only touching the ball a couple of times, it's going to be a long day. And that is how you get a stadium as big as what we have in Razorback Stadium. That's how you get it quieter. So quiet, matter of fact, that it sounds like you can find a squirrel farting. That's how quiet that stadium could be. At least it certainly felt like that in this particular game. And it was even like Auburn was coming off of a pretty rough game from a defensive aspect. So that's why it was also a little bit of a surprise. They gave up quite a bit of yardage in that Vanderbilt game. Didn't lead to points, but definitely is coming off of a rough day. Or Arkansas, actually, shoot. I'm talking out my butt. I apologize, but I meant to say Arkansas. They had a season high in offensive yards, and that enables them to pull this upset off against the Florida Gators. Oh boy, did they fall back down to earth, because Arkansas was not able to really find a rhythm. They needed 5 drives in this game just to avoid a 3 and out. When you start the game out with 4 3 and outs in a row, I mean, it's hard to, you can't win games if you have a goose egg on the scoreboard. And for the first 4 drives, what they end up doing, not only putting up a goose egg, they didn't even so much as get a first down. They also end up with only 110 yards of total offense, a few points as well. That actually, a lot, and the only reason they got those 3 points, by the way, was an interception. That was Payton Thorne's only mistake that allowed Arkansas to start at Auburn's 20, and it still only leads to 3 points. So rough day for the Arkansas Razorbacks, but all of the credit in the world to Auburn. You know, fast starts, they've been good. 2 of his Auburn team this year, they seem to have done a pretty good job of managing the game if they get out to that early lead. But some hard questions have to be asked at Arkansas, right? We've already went ahead and seen some full-scale changes around the conference. Texas A&M recently went ahead and fired its head coach. Mississippi State did the exact same thing. They fired Zach Arnett. Does Arkansas consider pulling that plug as well on Sam Pittman? Because this would be the type of game where you go ahead and do that. This is how bad the Arkansas program has been at the very least. Arkansas, not only they've been eliminated from postseason play, essentially 7 losses, they're not going to be bowl eligible. But they have to find a way to win their season finale against Missouri. And Missouri is playing great football right now to avoid their 4th 1 win or fewer season in SEC play since 2013. Matter of fact, the only team in the conference since in that last decade that has a worse conference record in the SEC, Vanderbilt. When you're thrown into the same sentence as Vanderbilt football, you are not having a very good time right now. And it was one of those games where, listen, the season was already going to be a disappointment. You're 3-6, but hey, you're favored. And if you can get past this Auburn team, maybe you can find a way after you take care of business against FIU. Yes, we are going to still wrap that up as a dub. You can find a way to pull a big upset at the end of the season against Missouri. Maybe you can, do a little bit better job in recruiting in the transfer portal, but you could do that with some extra practices, because the extra practices for a team like Arkansas, that could be critical. That could be extremely critical. Kills those dreams extremely quickly. Now, that being said, Sam Pittman has already made some partial changes to the coaching staff. They did end up firing Dan Enos. Dan Enos is no longer the offensive coordinator, but Pittman might be on some tenuous ground. I don't think he ends up getting fired this year. I don't think Sam Pittman does get fired this year, because Sam Pittman in the last 3 years has earned bowl berths. The real question is for Arkansas, is that enough? Will the Arkansas fan base be patient in allowing Sam Pittman to turn this around? That is a tougher question, because it really tries to get into the Arkansas psyche, and do they think they deserve more than what they have gotten from Sam Pittman? And I really don't know the answer to that, but some ugly discussions that might have to take place, and we've already seen the coaching carousel in effect. Michigan State also still looking for a head coach as well. 2 games left in the season. Does Arkansas think they go ahead and pull the plug so that they start on their next search? You never know. But one key stat that I wanted to go into, we talked about Peyton Thorne quite a bit in this little preview right here, but Auburn really, the big reason why Auburn was really able to win was their ability to run the ball on the ground. And boy, did they pound that thing on the ground. Tigers ended up running for over 350 yards, which is the most against an SEC opponent since 2016, when ironically was also against Arkansas, and they ran for close to 550 that particular day. So Auburn has a pretty bright couple of games ahead of them. They got New Mexico State. New Mexico State has clinched a berth to the Conference USA Championship, but I don't expect New Mexico State to compete with Auburn. That wouldn't be a realistic expectation. And then you got Alabama. You have Alabama for the Iron Bowl. You could be coming into that game on a 4-game winning streak. Alabama also riding a winning streak of their own. Could be a very enticing matchup here in the regular season finale. We'll see if Auburn can pull that upset in a couple of weeks. But great win by Auburn and able to earn bowl eligibility, doing so in spite of being on a 4-game losing streak. So this has been a year of streaks for Auburn. They start a year on a 3-game win streak. Then they've lost their next 4 games. Now they're currently lining another 3-game winning streak. So, hey, great job by Auburn. They're bowl eligible. And now they're guaranteed, because it's the SEC, they'll be guaranteed to get some extra practices at the end of the season. And that could help build some momentum for this Auburn program as Hugh Freeman progresses into year number 2. But Auburn is certainly not the only program out there that is building some serious momentum for itself. That is certainly not the case at all. Because what if I told you there's another program that's actually a newcomer to the ranks of the Power 5, joining up with the Big 12? Suddenly they're starting to find their rhythm in this new conference, in a much bigger conference than what they've ever experienced in the American. Well, let me tell you a little story about the UCF Knights, who hosted number 15 ranked Oklahoma State. And let me tell you something right now. Oklahoma State, you good? Everything all right over there, Big Phillip? Because, man, did Oklahoma State did not have a good time on the road whatsoever. They were down horrendous. I was shocked. Not that UCF won. I mean, Oklahoma State, they just came off of the Bedlam game, so a little bit of a trap game, it seemed like, looking back. But at the same time, no one expected this. I don't think even the most optimistic of UCF fans out there expected this kind of performance from their football team. UCF wins, but not only did they win, but they also went out. They won 45-3. Good Lord, UCF, you didn't have to do them boys like that, but they did. They certainly did. So what happened? How do we get the number 15 team in the nation, who was running a significant winning streak? Matter of fact, Oklahoma State going into this game, they won 5 games in a row. They was rolling. They were rolling in the deep like Adele. So what happened here? Especially after UCF, towards the beginning of the Big 12 conference season, they had one of their lowest points when they blew a 28-point lead to Baylor. And that was when the Baylor loss to Texas State was in the back of our minds as well. Oh, good Lord Almighty. I mean, it starts with that running game. R.J. Harvey, certified bad man. What can you say about a kid that ended up running for over 200 yards on the ground? He had 3 rushing touchdowns. One of them nearly went for an entire football field as well. He had a 92-yard run for a touchdown. It really felt like it set the tone for the game. Did it not? That was in the third quarter when UCF was already in the process of putting these boys away. oh boy, did they ended up putting them away for sure. And it's really a maturation of a football team. You know, UCF in their games against Kansas State, Baylor, Oklahoma, West Virginia as well, 4 or 5 losses in Big 12 conference play. They've been in positions to win. They just couldn't finish the job. And now in these last couple of weeks, and maybe it's just from beating Cincinnati, a fellow newcomer in the Big 12, maybe they found that conference. Maybe they found ways to not only start fast, but also to finish even better. So that's a big example of that right there. Because UCF, they opened the game up with 24 unanswered points. Oklahoma State was shut out. But the big thing, and this is the biggest difference of this UCF team between now and what we saw from them in September, is that UCF in that second half, they never took their foot off of that gas pedal at all. UCF ended up winning the second half 21-3. They never put their foot off the gas pedal, and that was for multiple of reasons. For side note, shout out to RJ Harvey, by the way. He does eclipse that 1,000-yard mark on the season, and that's the first time that we've seen any running back from UCF able to do that since Kevin Smith all the way back in 2007. That was when UCF was in a much different conference. Matter of fact, UCF, they were actually in Conference USA the last time that it happened. Like I said, things do change fast in this beautiful game of college football. So, RJ Harvey was special. What else? Defense was absolutely spectacular. 4 turnovers forced. At least 4 turnovers forced in this particular game. They were able to get 3 interceptions. And you know how we were just kind of raving about Ollie Gordon earlier this year? Yeah, Ollie Gordon was shut down in this game. He fumbled the ball, and that's only the second time that Ollie Gordon has fumbled the ball all season long. But also, Ollie Gordon was bottled up even without that fumble being accounted for. This is a guy that was torching Big 12 defenses all year long. He only had 25 yards on the ground. He never had a run more than 10 yards either. That's the center point and the vocal point of that offense. And it even was more apparent and more important that the running game had to get going, particularly in that first half, because in that first half, it started to rain. Not only did it rain, it became a monsoon. So for most of the time in the first half, the weather conditions made it extremely difficult to pass the football. And by the time things slowed down right before halftime from a weather perspective, Oklahoma State was already out of it. They were forced to kind of abandon the run, so to speak. And they're just not built to win in that particular way. That's why Oklahoma State struggled tremendously in the beginning of the season as well, when we saw them lose to South Alabama, when we saw them lose on the road as well against Iowa State. It's a big reason. That is a big-time reason for that. But John Rhys Plumlee, he looked really good in this game, though. He's quarterback for UCF, threw for nearly 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, had a 75-yard dot to Kobe Hudson right before the half as well. And he actually caught all 3 touchdown passes from John Rhys Plumlee. So, really good game for UCF. This win for them over number 15 Oklahoma State, it represents the highest ranked regular season win for UCF since 2009, when they took down a then number ranked 13 Houston squad at home. And again, this was dating back to when both Houston and UCF were in Conference USA. And not only that, this also will mark the 100th career victory for Gus Malzahn. People will forget this, but Gus Malzahn has a national championship to his resume, dating back to when he was head coach of Auburn. That was when Auburn had that amazing run to the national championship with Cam Newton and that supporting cast as well. So what does that mean? So what do these two teams have to look forward to in the last couple of weeks of the season? UCF is now 5-5 to keep their bowling hopes alive. 2 games that they have remaining: on the road against Texas Tech, and then they are at home for their senior day against Houston. Now, we don't know exactly how the model will stack them. We haven't taken a look and analyzed the Saturday games yet as a recording of this pod. But conversely, what we were looking at here is that UCF has 2 winnable games. They'll have 2 shots to get that 6th win and go bowling. And it's 2 winnable games, 2 good shots. So if UCF, if they can get that 6th win, especially with that massive losing streak that they had in the beginning of the year, that 5-game losing streak in late September and October, then that's a successful season. And especially considering this is a team that is making a transition from the American to the Big 12, where the level of competition is simply so much higher. And then for Oklahoma State still controls their destiny in terms of making it to the Big 12 championship. Oklahoma State will likely not be ranked in the college football playoff. I wouldn't rank Oklahoma State after this tragedy. I certainly hope the college football playoff shares that opinion, but they are still currently tied for second place against Oklahoma, Iowa State, Kansas State. They're still tied with all of those games. Now, Iowa State has to go play Texas, so that is the only team Oklahoma State has to worry about realistically here, as Iowa State beat Oklahoma State back in September. But if the Cowboys do win out, and again, Cowboys do have 2 winnable games, maybe this game will help refocus them for all intents and purposes. Houston and BYU, if they're able to win both of these games, then Oklahoma State will be 9-3, and they'll very likely be taking on either Texas or somebody else in that Big 12 championship. But Cowboys getting to the Big 12 championship, that's still a realistic possibility. Just maybe not being able to do that as a team that's ranked in the top 25. Because this is a really tough loss. Even though if this is only their 3rd loss of the year, this could be a game that keeps them out of the top 25 for the rest of the year. I'm just keeping that real with you guys. But Oklahoma State still has all of their goals in sight. And the same thing could be said about the UCF Knights in their first year in the Big 12. But speaking of some teams that maybe used to be in the group of 5, how about a team that is still in the group of 5 that frankly we gotta have a tougher conversation about? Remember when Air Force was ranked in the top 25 and a lot of people were talking about how Air Force, they should be ranked by the college football playoff. They should have the opportunity to compete for a New Year's Six Bowl depending on what happens. Well, where are those people now? Where are they? And also, did Army break the Air Force program? Because you would think after Air Force lost that the way that they did, not only being a close to 20-point favorite to Army, they end up losing badly in that game. They lose by 20 to the Army Academy. You would think Air Force would be refocused as, listen, even though they ended up losing the game, they still have all of their goals in front of them, but they go back at it. They go on the road to take on Hawaii. And Hawaii has had it rough this year. They'd come in 3-7. They've only won 1 game in the Mountain West Conference. A solid Mountain West Conference, but not a really not a good year for Hawaii, to say the least. Hawaii wins this game. And not only does Hawaii end up winning this game, they win this game by double digits. In another game in which Air Force was heavily favored. The final betting line going into this 11 p.m. Eastern kickoff was 22.5. And it was down horrendous. It was not good at all. Braden Steiger, we talked about Braden Steiger this year. He's been, an up and down quarterback, but he's had his good moments. We've talked about those moments when we saw them back in the beginning of the season, back in September, when he was almost able to pull an upset off against Vanderbilt. Actually exposed a very pedestrian Vanderbilt secondary. Braden Steiger did his thing. He throws 2 touchdown passes, both of which went to Palafe Ashwak. He's a freshman wide receiver. This is the first year this guy has seen the field, and Ashlock, he is going to be a very good piece moving forward for Hawaii. I do want to point that out. if he does enter the transfer portal, I'm sure this will be a guy that will have some Power 5 interest moving forward. The guy has 720 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. This is a very good receiver that Hawaii is very fortunate to have and able to recruit out of Ushwin, Texas. And while he didn't have the most receiving yards in this game, he only ended up with 6-7 yards. He did it off of 12 catches. He had multiple touchdowns. Hawaii loves to give this guy the ball, and boy, did he ended up making some plays. Plus, Braden Scheiger did end up running in another touchdown as well. So we expected this. Hawaii is a team that loves to pass the ball. They're more of an air raid type of offense. I remember watching Hawaii first couple of weeks of the season, since we did have a couple of parlays that involved the Rainbow Warriors in those games against Vanderbilt. And there's someone else that they played in the very beginning of the season, but it's escaping me at the moment. We're going to do a quick double check. Stanford was they played Stanford. That was the game. But what's going on with Air Force right now? What is happening with this Air Force team? They're just not getting the same. I don't know if it's one of those things if Air Force had an injury problem or what happened. But man, did this was a shocker. Zach Larrier, I don't think played in this game at all. So maybe that has a lot to do with it because they just don't have that same offensive zip. I'm not saying that they were balanced by anything. Air Force was never a team that was quote unquote a balanced team. Air Force is a military academy, and the rule of military academies are we like to go ahead and do a triple option offense, which is what we do. So that might be a big thing to do with it. Because their quarterbacks in this game for Air Force went 3 for 9. Did have 114 yards. So when they did actually complete the pass, they actually went for explosive plays. Problem was, Air Force completed as many passes to the Hawaii secondary as they did to their own receivers. I'm going to let you guys right now, Hawaii is not what you would call a quote-unquote elite defense. They're 4-7 for a reason. That's a problem. That's actually a really big problem, to be honest with you. So turnovers, again, like in that Army game, was a massive factor in this one. When you turn the ball over that many times, that's not good. And not only that, they also ended up turning the ball over on the ground as well. A fumble loss. So 4 total turnovers for Air Force. That was really what the biggest factor was, because you look at all these other stats across the board, you would think that Air Force would at least be a lot closer in this particular game. Total yards, for example, Air Force actually outgained Hawaii 315 to 297. So Air Force won there. Hawaii and Air Force had roughly the same number of first downs. Hawaii actually won the time possession barely. It's like 30 and a half minutes for Hawaii to Air Force's 29 and a half. And that's really the root of the problem there as well. When you're a triple option team and you're throwing it 9 times compared to 47 times on the ground, there is no excuse for you to lose the time possession. So that's kind of another thing as well. It's not as big of a deal, but that is a factor that you would have never expected. If I told you at the beginning of the season, hey, Hawaii is going to have more time with the ball than Air Force when they match up in November, you would have called me crazy. And if there was a prop line, you would have told me, well, if you believe that so much, why don't you go bet on it? And I wouldn't, because I wouldn't have saw that either. I would not have made a bet that Air Force would have the ball less than Hawaii. Wouldn't do it. But they did eventually find a way to score in the third quarter. Their first touchdown came on a 20-play drive that took 12 minutes. And it didn't even lead into a touchdown. It led to a field goal. That was with 6:20 remaining in the first half. So they had a drive that lasted nearly the entire quarter, only to lead to a field goal. I mean, when you have a drive that long, you got to be able to score. But that was really the biggest thing. The turnovers were absolutely killer. Absolutely killer for Air Force. But for Air Force, at least they still have the opportunity to compete for a Mountain West championship. Now, they do lose that leeway that they've had built up over the course of the season. That's gone. Air Force, if they want to go to the Mountain West Championship, don't forget about hosting. Forget about hosting for a split second. They got to win at least one of these next 2 games. While they're still on top, the game that they have next week is going to be huge. It's going to be absolutely huge. Air Force has UNLV at home. They are tied with UNLV on top of the Mountain West. Whoever wins that game will likely get to host the Mountain West Championship, and that's a big advantage because for many group of 5 conferences, and I'm pretty sure this is the case as well with the Mountain West, whoever has the best conference record gets to host at their home stadium. So UNLV having it at their house instead of having to travel somewhere else, that's a big deal, especially because UNLV plays in Allegiant. That's essentially a dome. And I bet you UNLV would rather play in that kind of environment than go to Colorado Springs, Colorado, where it's a lot colder, especially in the wintertime when this conference championship game would be happening in December in Colorado. Just letting that be known. And then Air Force also has Boise State. Boise State on the road, and Boise State, another team that is in the mix. They're tied. Boise State is tied for second. They're actually still trying to get bowl eligibility. Don't know if they'll actually make that happen or not, but Boise State is still right in there in that picture. So Air Force has a couple of critical games that are going to be happening. And man, I don't know what's going on with Zach Lear, but I really do hope that they get him back, because if they don't, oh baby, it's going to be a problem. Going to be a real problem because he is a huge vocal point for their offense. And then for Hawaii as well, for the Rainbow Warriors. Rainbow Warriors, so they can't be bowl eligible, even though they could hypothetically still win 6 games, because here's the thing with Hawaii. Hawaii has 13 games on their schedule. And a big reason why is because, they have the travel exceptions to help offset travel costs, traveling on and off the island. It takes a lot to get a football team multiple hours across an ocean. It's a problem. They still have 2 more games at Mountain West Conference play. They can't be bowl eligible, but they can finish the season strong. They got Wyoming on the road, and then they have Colorado State at home. 2 games that could be winnable games for the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. So they can finish 6 and 7. And while that won't initially get them the bowl eligibility unless there's not enough 6 and 6 teams that are out there, it certainly helps build momentum into the next season. But even though Air Force shot themselves in the foot multiple times, losing the turnover battle 4-0, Hawaii still had to come out and make plays. And Hawaii did that. So hats off to the Rainbow Warriors. Huge upset. Big win at Clarence T.C. Ching Athletics Complex. And all of a sudden, this Mountain West gets very interesting in terms of who those 2 teams would ultimately end up being that will compete for the Mountain West Championship. So those were the 3 games that I really wanted to dig into, but I wanted to make sure that I leave you on this specific kind of note. Now, one thing that I always like to do is I always like to give my best bets because I'm a gambler at heart. I like to gamble, particularly on college football. That's kind of what I feel is my wheelhouse, especially with the development of the power rating model. It's first edition of that. Now, that being said, we did okay in terms of our best bets last week. We ended up going 2 for 4, which, it's fine. It's fine. It's not great, but it's not bad. But we want to be better. We want to get to a higher level than what we ended up doing this past weekend. So we got some things planned for this week. We are definitely looking at games from all over the place, games from Tuesday to Saturday. We'll go ahead and drop 2 of those best bets right now in terms of what we got going on. In terms of Maction, there's a couple of games in that midweek Maction that I definitely want to dive into here tonight. And one of those games is actually happening tomorrow night. One of those games that are happening tomorrow night is Akron going on the road to take on Eastern Michigan. I really like the spot here for the Eastern Michigan Eagles, -4.5. It could be an ugly defensive game, don't get me wrong, but Akron is very lethargic on offense. They have not really shown much life offensively outside of that Kent State rivalry game, but we also believe that Kent State might actually be the worst team in the country. Kent State lost a lot in the transfer portal, but it's not about them. I love the fact that Eastern Michigan is at home. I think they're playing some solid football. They have a lot to play for, more to play for than what Akron does. So we're going to go ahead and pick Eastern Michigan -4.5. And then Wednesday night, we got Buffalo on the road against Miami of Ohio. I really love the home favorite as well. Miami of Ohio trying to build some momentum as they try to cement themselves into that MAC championship. Toledo has already clinched on the other side. Miami is looking to do the same thing. Very good defensive unit. Shut out Akron in the previous week. We like Miami of Ohio here, -8.5, hosting a Buffalo team that's going to have to travel quite a distance for max standards to get to their stadium out in Western Ohio, right on the border with Indiana. So we're going to rock with Miami of Ohio, -8.5. And again, we'll also do Eastern Michigan, -4.5. And we are locking that in here tonight. Those betting lines are as of about 4:15 Eastern uh, on Monday. So this is on November 13th, and I'm recording this podcast. I'll have two more later on this week where we'll dive into, Friday and Saturday games that I really like. But as of right now, these are two games that I'm really keeping my eye on. More to come later this week. But part of the announcement that I had, and I kind of alluded to this in the beginning. This is we're getting out the best bets. If there is any game that you want me to briefly talk about, let me know down in the comment section, because I think what I want to kind of dive and get into, as I just kind of had this idea in my head today while I was working, is if there's a game that you want me to talk about, I'll let you guys know what the model thinks and give like a little like 30 to 45-second rundown of the game itself and what I think is going to go down, and we'll drop it as a YouTube short. All you have to do is go ahead and drop a comment down below to this podcast. That's really all you got to do. And I do my best to make sure that any comment that is dropped here on the channel is actually read, and we'll do something about it. That being said, though, we are going to go ahead and sign off for tonight. But man, we will have some more college football content coming your way later this week. Later this week, we will end up covering the key matchups in week number 12. Could be looking at anywhere from 3 to 4 top 25 matchups. Depending on how many of those matchups are indeed top 25, we may also dive into who would be the best fit in terms of who should be the next coach for Texas A&M or Mississippi State, who did fire their head coaches. So you're not going to want to miss that next podcast. But if you did end up enjoying this one in particular, I hope you guys do a couple of things for me. One, hit that like button if you haven't done so already. Lets me know that, hey, you enjoy this podcast. And since you tell me that, hey, you enjoy this podcast, vice versa, what you can also do for a brother is hit that subscribe button, or let somebody, or if you already have subscribed, let a friend or a family member know that this college football podcast exists. And, it's kind of like spinning as a, way to support a small business, because that's really what we are in this YouTube universe. We're a small business. And who doesn't want to support small businesses, especially one that is not afraid to talk about the group of five here in the college football world, because they deserve a little bit of love too. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for tonight. I am your host, Jake, and I hope you guys are all out there having a good one here tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on when I get that next this podcast up for your viewing enjoyment. I'm going to go ahead and sign off, but I'm hoping you guys are out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.